Good morning, everybody. This is the July 11th, 2021 Sunday School lesson. Again, trying out things a little bit different today. Trying to learn this technology as we go along. Doing it on YouTube is certainly different than doing it on Facebook Live. This is only the second YouTube lesson for those of you that have been following me in the past, or those that have just joined in on this. My prior lessons are all on my Facebook page. You have to go back and kind of sort through the videos, though, of course, if you want to catch up on any of them. Again, I teach Sunday school at Falmouth Baptist Church in Falmouth, Kentucky, and had some requests to continue doing the video lessons. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to be reading out of the book of Revelation. Again, continuing our study of some of the various letters that Jesus directed to be written to the various early churches. So I always like to start off with a word of prayer. If you have any special prayer needs, certainly want to lift those up. So if you would just bow with me and we'll have a word of prayer, then we'll get started. Dear Lord, just again, thank you for allowing us to gather together and study your word. Father, I just pray that your spirit would guide this lesson, would speak to me and speak to those who watch or listen and join in. Father, lift up some special prayer requests. Some of my family that need some healing right now and some comfort, Lord. I just lift them up. I lift up all those that are going through difficult days and those that are suffering through various hardships. Lift up any prayer that's on the heart of anybody that might be watching this video, Lord. Just lift those matters up to you to deal with in your way, Father. Father, I just pray that you would be with us, guide us, especially pray for those that are lost. Just pray that your spirit will touch them, speak to them, and that they will respond. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, today we're reading out of Revelation, chapter 3, verses 7 through 13. The title of the lesson is Faithful in All Things. And the point of the lesson is faithfully trust God as you minister to others. In the materials that we have, they had sort of an opening question. When has a word of encouragement been especially timely? Have you had a time in your life where just someone gave you a word of encouragement when you just really needed it at that time? You were maybe going through some difficult times, and it was just timely, and it really just spoke to your heart. Words of encouragement are always good when you know they're sincere words of encouragement. Certainly, they're much better than words of discouragement. I've over the years heard the phrase that some people seem to have the gift of discouragement because no matter what you do, there's always a better way to do it. They've always got something to say that sort of brings you down, that just they just don't need to say it, really. But a word of encouragement, how can that make a difference in a person's life? I think of children who get that word of encouragement and how they build on that and their life goes on, and because people have encouraged them along the way, that's been good. I saw a post the other day. I know it's still a few weeks, a month thereabouts before school starts, but I saw something the other day about to teachers saying, look, forget about what the kids done in the past, what they did last year. This is a new year. Give them a chance. Give them an encouragement. How often in our society to people, because of their name and the folks that came before them, their brothers or sisters or parents, when you hear it, you judge and you don't really encourage. But when you get that word of encouragement, how can it help you? How can it move you along? And that's especially true with our faith. When we get a word of encouragement, it can go a long way in helping people around us keep walking strong in their own faith just by encouraging them on what they're doing. Sometimes it's sort of you feel like it's a cliche. You walk out, if you go to church, you end the church, if the preacher's standing there, you shake, you say, oh, good sermon today, Pastor, and you move on. It's sort of like, when we meet people on the street, sometimes we just say, how are you today? And sometimes we don't really care, it's just what we say. But sometimes, you can tell that someone, when they give you that word of encouragement, that they really mean it. Over the last year and a half doing these lessons, I've had words of encouragement that have helped encourage me to continue to do lessons. Sometimes even a card or a note that comes in the mail, or a personal message, an instant message on Facebook or whatever, or text. those things encourage us and help us continue on. And today the letter that we're looking at in Revelation is to the church at Philadelphia. Not Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but Philadelphia in the ancient world. Philadelphia was a large city. It was a significant city. It had a significant location where it was strategically important militarily. It was located along a strategic trade route, so there was a lot of trade that went through Philadelphia, and had very rich volcanic soil that was especially good for agriculture and especially for grapes. And one of their prime industries was the wine industry. And even some of the pagan gods that they had temples for there was, I think it was Dionysus, the god of wine, if I've got that correct, was there. But so it was an important city, but the church in Philadelphia was not a big church. On the surface, the church seemed small, seemed weak, and insignificant. But that's looking at it through human eyes. Through the eyes of Jesus, the church was much more important. The church was great due to their faithfulness with him and their perseverance and sticking to the word of that he had imparted to them, the gospel that they had heard. And so the church was a great church, even though it was a small church in the grand scheme of things. And as I read that about the church, it made me think, how many churches, and I know I'm in some groups and talk about, the vast majority of particularly Baptist churches are small churches, 100, 125 people. We see the big mega churches and think, oh, how wonderful those are and how much they can do. But the real backbone of our faith, probably no matter what denomination we are small churches. And that may seem insignificant. And that's the church at Philadelphia. But Jesus saw that church different. So we're going to read the verses. Again, Revelation 3, 7 through 13. Then we'll come back and talk about them. So starting at verse 7. Write to the angel of the church in Philadelphia, thus says the Holy One, the true one, the one who has the key of David, who opens and no one will close, and who closes and no one opens. I know your works. Look, I have placed before you an open door that no one can close, because you have but little power. Yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Note this, I will make those from the synagogue of Satan who claim to be Jews and are not, but are lying. I will make them come and bow down at your feet, and they will know that I have loved you. Because you have kept my command to endure, I will also keep you from the hour of testing that is going to come on the whole world to test those who live on the earth. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have, so that no one takes your crown. The one who conquers, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will never go out again. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name. Let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. So again, if you've been with me in all the letters that Jesus directs John to write to the various churches, he starts off, saying to the angel of the church in Philadelphia. Again, that angel, messenger, pastor, to the preacher at the church of Philadelphia. Here's what I want you to say. And again, Jesus now describes himself in several names. He used several names to describe himself. He says, I am the Holy One. This is a word that was often used in the Old Testament to refer to God. So the readers, the audience at that day would understand Jesus is referring to himself as God. He says, I am the true one. It emphasizes, Jesus' genuineness, his faithfulness. He is the embodiment of truth. He says, I am the one who has the key of David. And this is a reference to the Old Testament, again, to Isaiah 22, chapter 22, verses 15 through 25, during the reign of King Hezekiah. God declared that Eliakim would hold the key of David. In other words, that person would hold and control who would have access to the king. Jesus, as the Messiah, through the lineage of David, controls the access to the presence and the blessings of God. So Jesus is, again, as he's done in all these letters, pointed out to his divinity, his power. And then he says, I am the one who opens and no one will close, the one who closes and no one will open. Jesus alone has the authority to open and close the door to his kingdom. So again, Jesus is emphasizing his authority when this letter is written. It's sort of like, take this seriously. This is not just coming from, some average Joe out there. This is important stuff, a letter from God. And he says to the church there at Philadelphia, he says, I know your works. So many of the letters that we've been studying, Jesus says, I know your works. And he always, in most of them, other than the one last week, he has some compliments about things you've done good. And then he says, oh, but here's the problem with your church. This time he doesn't do that. This is a letter of encouragement to the church of Philadelphia. It should be a letter of encouragement to the modern church as well, if we're acting like the church at Philadelphia did. Jesus says, I know your works. He knew the church had remained faithful to him. Their motives were pure. They were rooted in their love for Christ, for the gospel, and their love for each other. He says, I am the key to the open door. Look, I will open the door. The entrance to the kingdom is through me. Although, church, you have little power. He says it's not through your power, church, and you have little power. Again, you're a small, in the world's eyes, a small, insignificant church, he says. But, you're few in number, but your quality is great. Sometimes we talk about quantity and quality. Their quantity maybe was small, but the quality of what they had was great. The church had little power in and of itself. He says, but you kept my word. You did not deny my name. So the quality of your witness, the quality of what you've done, that you've stuck with the things. He doesn't have a but part to this letter to the church where he's telling them the things that where they've backslidden or where they've had problems. He says, you're small, but man, you are so true. You are so good to me. And he says, he starts looking at and comparing this church to the religious leaders. In this particular case, to the Jewish church at the time. He says, he sees through that religious facade of the religious people that have rejected him. He says, they're part of the synagogue of Satan, those that rejected him. Again, here he was talking about the Jewish church. The Jews were the chosen people. The Messiah was to come through them. But many of them had rejected him, as opposed, and unlike the church at Philadelphia, they claimed that they were religious. They claimed they were of God, but they rejected the Messiah. He says, basically with that, you have become members of the church. You've aligned yourself with Satan. It's sort of like you're either for me or against me today, that we hear today. And we think of that, this is a letter to the early church, but I think it's also sort of a commentary, to the churches that are faithful. There are some out there that sort of have aligned themselves with this world, and they've changed the gospel. They've changed the meaning of the gospel. They've watered down the gospel. And Jesus saying those folks, that have rejected me, rejected my word, they're part of the church of Satan. That the early church that he was talking about there, or not the early church, but the church that had rejected him, and I think it's true of churches today that reject him. It says they have this external facade of religiousness, of piousness, but they're not of God. And he said, the day will come when those people will bow down. He says at your feet, but basically they will bow down at the feet of God. This is possibly a reference to the last days, the day that the enemies of God will face judgment. Those people who have rejected Jesus Christ and the Messiah, both in the past, in today's world, and in the future, the day will come when they will bow down at the feet of God and worship, because they will face the judgment of God. He says, but because you, Church of Philadelphia, because you've kept my commands, because you have endured in a world of sin and persecution. The early church was persecuted by the Jews, by the Romans, by any number of people. They were being persecuted by them. So, but because you've remained true, because you've, kept the faith, kept strong and endured this persecution, remained faithful to me, he says, I will keep you from the hour of testing. And again, even though this was written to the church at Philadelphia, it's written to the believer today. Jesus is encouraging us to remain faithful, to remain true to his gospel, to his promise. And he says, he'll keep you from the hour of testing. That time when the hour that would test all who are on the earth. And biblical scholars debate what this means. Again, in Revelation, we could spend not just a few minutes, we could spend hours, days, months, years discussing some of what is meant in Revelation, and there's not always complete agreement. Most scholars think, this is a reference to the tribulation, that they would have to face the tribulation. And he said to those that are faithful, I'll keep you from that hour of testing. What did that mean? Does that mean they will be raptured beforehand? Does it mean that the tribulation, they'll live through it, but they won't have to endure the punishment? They'll get through it and come through it with Christ's protection. We don't really know, but the idea is that at some point there will be a judgment, and that those that have remained true, those that have remained faithful to the word of Jesus Christ and his message and his gospel, that he'll protect us, that encouragement. And I think this speaks to the world today. Again, this is my opinion. You may disagree with me, but I think that's sort of as a word of encouragement to the church of today. I hate to say we're under attack, because that word, I think, in my opinion, again, is overused. So many think, the church is under attack. And there are people that mock us. And there are people, we've heard during the pandemic, you read all these narratives of people being arrested for having church and this and that. And I'm not saying that there aren't sometimes those kind of things that happen, but we still live in a world where sometimes those that go to church are looked at funny. We've heard of, it's true, people have lost jobs in the science community because of their faith, because they try to align their faith with science and on things like evolution and creationism. But as such, in our society, being called a Christian sometimes is a dirty name. It's a bad label in our society some days. So I think this speaks to us that even though we may come under persecution from various and sundry groups and all these movements where it's okay for them to voice their opinion and say where they stand on issues, but heaven forbid we voice ours that's different than theirs. There's no tolerance. The ones that preach tolerance often have no tolerance for others. Again, I'll quit preaching on that. That's my opinion. You can agree or disagree. But during this time, the church does seem to be under attack, and certainly the church at Philadelphia had been under attack. The early church was clearly under attack from many fronts. And Jesus says, he says, I'll protect you through that. And when you get over into verse 11, after he promises protection, he makes a declaration. He says, I am coming soon. He has promised a second coming, that he will come back, for his church and for his people. That word soon gets a lot of people's shorts in a wad, because they start thinking, that's today or that's tomorrow or should have happened years ago. You look at some of the early disciples, some of the early books in the Bible, and some of them in the New Testament, some of them, sort of question, what do you mean soon? They expected, some of them expected Christ to come, shortly after he had ascended into heaven, after being crucified, that he would be back during their lifetimes. That's part of our human nature. We want to look at things from a human perspective and put the timing on ours. So when we hear that word soon, think of it through the eyes of a child as compared to the eyes of an old man like me. You tell a child something's coming soon, they think, in the next couple of minutes. An old dude like me, something's coming soon. Well, that's, a few days, maybe a few months, a couple weeks. It has a different meaning, and it's true when we look at God's timing. When God says soon, in his timing, it could mean, generations. It has meant generations. We need to look at that. But the thing is, the promise is there, I am coming. Whenever it's going to happen, it is going to happen. We always hear these debates on the end days and the ends of time, and people say we're living through them. And there are certainly signs there, but there have been signs there for 2,000 years. But ultimately, unless we are alive when he comes during the rapture, we're all going to have our end times that we're going to have to face, and we'll have a second coming. But he promises that I will come. And he says, so, hold on to what you have. He's encouraged the church, and he says, just keep hanging on to what you have. Hang on to my truth. Hang on to the truth of Jesus Christ. Don't fall prey to the traps of Satan, to the traps of the world. Continue doing the things you're doing. I was a teenager in the 70s, and there was that phrase, that keep on keeping on, was what you saw it on these posters, keep on trucking, back in the old days. But he basically says, just hang on to that, keep doing what you're doing, remain faithful, endurance, remain faithful. And he says, to the one who conquers, to the one who stays faithful, who perseveres, he says, I'll make a pillar in the temple of my God. Again, the symbolism is to that audience of that day. When you think of the Greek and Roman temples, some of the pillars will be hundreds of feet high, but they represent stability and strength. They would hold up tons of marble or granite or whatever rock that the temples and the buildings were made of, strength and stability, and they would have names inscribed upon them, of who they honored and things like that. And Jesus says, I'm going to make you a pillar in the temple of my God. You will be, on the believer's pillar. Your name will be there. He says, I will write on you the name of my God, indicating that you belong to him. If you remain faithful, you belong to him. That, like I say, those ancient Greek and Roman pillars, they would put the names of the gods, to whom the church belonged or the temple belonged. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to make you a pillar in a heavenly church, in an eternal building. And your name will be on it, and it won't be removed. It won't be removed. You will have citizenship in heaven, if you just continue with the faith, persevering. Jesus was encouraging that early church. This should be a letter of encouragement to us today, that we need to continue on. Jesus, as he ends up this letter, much like we discussed last week, he says, I forgot to turn my page here, but let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. Listen to what I'm saying. This is important, is what he's saying to us. If you have the ability to hear and listen to what I'm saying, understand that this is a promise. This is important stuff. And so he's encouraging not only the early church, he's encouraging us to continue to be faithful. That at times our numbers may be small. And, I think the church I go to, in our community, it's a large church, I guess. There are some others that are large, just as large. There are also a number of small churches, but in the grand scheme of things, we're what would be considered a small church. We run under 200 in service every Sunday, well under 200. So we're not these churches that fill thousands of people. But Jesus says don't worry about those things. The important part is what's in your heart. Is your heart remaining faithful to me? Is your heart true to the gospel? Have you remained faithful to what I've said? That's what he wants. That's what we need to project to the world. So it's an encouragement to us sometimes when we're going through difficult days. And as I said, I know some folks, some family, and a lot of people that are going through tough times right now, and going through scary times right now. And Jesus says, have faith. This is an encouragement to you. Have faith. I will get you through these things. I will protect you. Doesn't mean everything's going to be great. Doesn't mean everything's going to be easy. But at the end of the day, I will protect you. So I'm going to wrap up with that. I apologize if I preach too much. Sometimes, though, it's just the way it comes out. But we'll continue to do these, Lord willing. I'll try to have this up again, these messages every Sunday morning on the YouTube channel. Obviously, if you want to get notifications when they go up. You can subscribe to the channel and click on all that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to promote all that, but that is certainly one way. If you're not as familiar with how YouTube works, you can subscribe and you will get emails or notices that, hey, a new video is up. I get that on a lot of channels that I follow, and so anyway, I thank you for joining in. We'll continue with these lessons as long as I feel led to do so. I pray that you have a good week. I pray that you maybe go back and read these verses and find encouragement from God, from the letters from Jesus Christ, directly to his church, to his people, to encourage us to persevere, and the reward that remains for us. So have a good week. Again, let's say, Lord willing, I'll see you next week. If you don't have a church home and you're nearby, Falmouth Baptist Church, corner of 4th and Maple in Falmouth, Kentucky. Sunday school at 9:45 and worship service at 10:45. We would love to have you join us. Also be on the Facebook page, the Falmouth Baptist Church Facebook page at 10:45. Brother Combe will be preaching, sharing a word with us, and we'll be live streaming that as well. So certainly invite you to join us. So have a good week. God bless.